Now, the second development is just the other day, Judicial Council came out with a ruling finally on paragraph 2548.2, which was a provision in our discipline going back to the very beginning that whenever a church wants to disaffiliate, they can transfer their affiliation to another evangelical denomination. And it's been used dozens of times over several decades, and yet the bishops submitted that to the Judicial Council. That's the United Methodist version of the Supreme Court, and asked for a ruling. Can it be used for local churches that want to transfer their affiliation to the new conservative startup denomination, the Global Methodist Church? WCA and other conservative advocacy groups have been pushing local conservative churches to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church and transfer their affiliation to the Global Methodist Church. And rather than use paragraph 2553 that was designed in the 2019 Special Call General Conference for liberal churches that didn't like the conservative stance of the Book of Discipline, rather than using that, conservative churches have been saying, we would like to use 2548.2 to exit because it has easier provisions with voting, has easier exit provisions with how much money is owed and how long you have to pay it when you go. Now there is a definitive judgment saying, nope, 2548.2 cannot be used for any churches, really, that want to exit unless they're going to one of the denominations officially adopted or approved by the Council of Bishops in the Pan-Methodist connection. So we may or may not talk about that. There are a lot of different factors involved in this, but there are a lot of conservative churches, a lot of conservative clergy who feel like this is an open sign of corruption within the Judicial Council. And this comes after a couple other public decisions made several months ago now that seem to indicate much sympathy for institutional parties and no sympathy whatsoever for conservative churches that feel trapped in a covenant relationship that they don't want to be a part of anymore. So we'll talk more about that. All right, well, let's shift things to the Judicial Council now and the decision they made on 2548.2. The way I set this up was this seems indicative to a lot of conservative people that the Judicial Council has been co-opted essentially by the interests of the Council of Bishops. There is a strong institutionalist impulse to hold everything together as much as possible, and so that means erecting barriers that make it harder for churches to leave, and when they do, they have to pay out the nose in order to do it. 2548.2 made it so that a lower threshold needed to be met in order to vote to leave. People could make payments over time with unfunded pension liabilities, and there was an understanding that it was a transfer of membership to another denomination rather than just ending their connection to the UMC. These are the differences between 2548.2 and 2553, which is now the only option. Does this seem indicative to you that the Judicial Council, I mean, we're having this conversation in the context of a culture where in the Supreme Court, the American Supreme Court, there have been a series of decisions that seem to be in favor of right-leaning persons. We're in a body now, an ecclesiastical body that has a series of decisions made that seem to indicate solidarity with a left-leaning position. So as I'm reflecting on it, I feel that temptation to say, oh, they've just been co-opted. But then I find that a very disingenuous way to be in the world, to be honest. I don't appreciate it whenever left-leaning people in the political arena just say, oh, the Supreme Court is full of it. And so is it the same situation in the United Methodist Church, or are there differences here where we can speak with more clarity?
That's a great question.
I felt good about it, yes.
So, yes, I would say that conservatives feel like institutional protection, trying to protect the institution, does seem pretty prevalent. And a lot of it has to do with timing of releases, questions posed to it by the bishops in timing, not just this decision, but others. Everything seems to be, appears to be, if you were just looking at it from 1,000 foot, that there's a lot of conversation probably taking place on how do we protect the institution. And let's just be honest, every institution tries to protect itself. So it's human nature for the annual conference or wherever to try to make sure the annual conference lives beyond December 31st, 2023. It's just human nature. It's who we are. We want the organization. Think about the local church. Okay, new pastor, you come in, the number one goal of some of those church folks is to make sure this church doesn't change too much that they can't identify it. And they will fight tooth and nail to make sure that you don't change things in the church so that they can still say this is their church and what they belong to. Not bad people. They have a heart for Jesus.
Well,
they believe they're doing what's in the best
sure.
interest of the church.
They don't have bad intentions.
They don't have bad intentions.
And
They're-
likewise, people in the Judicial Council, people at the top of our denominational polity, you're not inferring that they have bad motives. Oh, they're corrupt. But you're inferring that there is an institutional interest prevailing in their decisions.
It appears that way.
Yeah.
And it feels that way. You know, some of my colleagues are totally bent out of shape about that. For me, it's them just trying to protect the institution that they love and that they think is headed in a right direction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what they're doing. For me, I think the denomination's headed in a wrong direction. And so their decisions for me play out in my life as in, it just doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. Doesn't operate that way. The decision really plays out, and I heard this at a meeting yesterday, that 2548.2 is about property and 2553 is about people.
Well, and even so, the property can only be transferred under strict circumstances. So the language in the discipline is very broad. You know, just talks about another evangelical denomination. It does not say that the only body that can decide what is an evangelical denomination is the Council of Bishops. It does not say that the annual conference cannot define that for itself. And realistically, for several decades, dozens, if not hundreds of churches have disaffiliated using that provision.
Right.
And it has been determined by the annual conference. And, you know, this is in common with another Judicial Council decision several months ago saying, yes, the language in the discipline is there that an entire annual conference can disaffiliate. However, General Conference never created the process whereby they would do that. So even though it's in writing, and even though hypothetically you can do it, until you create the process, you can't do it. And things like that feel very disingenuous.
Yeah.
And especially when in the discipline we have language saying, the primary unit of our denomination is not the General Conference, it's the annual conference. And then to have all these seemingly strong federal authority decisions saying, actually the annual conference doesn't have this authority, Council of Bishops does. And if there's a rationale to that, I haven't seen it yet. They just say it.
They just say it. Well, in the Council of Bishops really don't have any authority, but here they are with.
That's one of the things they say, and then we see them exercise all that authority.
Here they are with all of the authority that they have upon themselves.
Yes.